All right, folks. Now, my next guest says that the administration is trying to reverse the K, a backwards K, okay? Joining me now, MacroMavens founder, president, Stephanie Pomboy. All right, Stephanie, you know, I love reading your work, and sometimes I even understand it. So you say that the way we get this reverse K is deleveraging the public sector and re-leveraging the private sector. So walk us through this.
Yeah, actually, I would say it's not so much reversing the K as closing the K. You know, or you really want to raise, the objective is to raise the bottom and basically give, you know, create a revitalization of the economy and the middle class in the process. And so this has not been the dynamic, obviously, for the last several decades, and especially in the post-COVID era, where basically it was all about propping up assets and hoping that all of that would trickle down through high-end consumption to employment and ultimately help boost the lower end of the K. And so far, clearly, that little experiment has not turned out the way it was planned to be. So Warsh comes in, and basically between he and Secretary Bessent, Treasury Secretary Bessent, the plan is to essentially, I don't want to say starve the government, but rather than having the Fed's balance sheet serve, you know, provide capacity for endless expansionary fiscal policy, they're going to shrink the Fed's balance sheet and take the cookie jar away from Congress, basically. And in lieu of that, support Main Street by lowering the Fed funds rate and reducing the stranglehold of taxes and regulation, and try to revitalize Main Street. And a lot of this is really aimed toward investment and manufacturing particularly, and you see that with the efforts to reshore production, et cetera. And it's a noble goal, and when you look at the skew between the top and the bottom, you wonder why no one has attempted it before. The problem is it's incredibly challenging, and accomplishing this feat will not be easy. So I'm glad we have some smart people who are trying to do it, but I still am you know, I'm hopeful, but I think there are a lot of major obstacles they're going to have to overcome.
Yeah, we're going to share some of the obstacles on the screen here in a second. But I think also, let's be honest, right? I mean, the folks that are benefiting most from this have all the power. Right, and they, you know, if it costs $2 or $3 billion to get elected, they essentially are electing all the people who are in control of these things. You mentioned Congress. Congress is going to have a fit. It doesn't matter what party it is. They, you know, everybody goes there and they come home with a bridge to nowhere, and you know, someone's a benefactor. You know, their pocket somehow gets fatter. It's a great beneficiary cycle between all of them, and everyone else is shut out looking on the outside in. So let's talk about these obstacles then, because one thing you notice is that recently Fed fund rate cuts have seemed to stop working, right? They're not moving the needle like they once did. Do we just have to keep at it? I mean, because that rate hiking cycle was aggressive.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the problem is, and you and I have talked about this before, this notion of fiscal dominance where, you know, the debt at $38 trillion is now so large that it's hard to persuade anyone that it's a worthy exercise to lend the U.S. government any money for a period of time. So that is a key challenge. But even if you were to embrace the administration's plan of revitalizing growth and operate on the assumption that the debt to GDP ratio for the public sector will start to come down, you still have the other problem, and that is that we are one-time creditors. Foreign central banks, and most recently the Federal Reserve, are in theory now out of the picture. You know, we already know foreign central banks have been rapidly diversifying away from U.S. treasuries, and as we reshore production and export fewer dollars for them to recycle, they have no need to recycle back into our treasury market. And then Warsh, you know, advocates shrinking the balance sheet, which means the Federal Reserve will no longer be providing support. So it's a supply-demand issue at this point, where we're rolling $10 trillion of paper this year, and who's going to buy that? So, you know, and they have a whole bunch of plans for that, like a stable coin reserve to absorb bill issuance, et cetera. But so that's one major obstacle. The prospect that inflation picks back up is another obstacle. We're in, I would say, a commodity super cycle, just the very early stages. And at a minimum, I think we can all see that there's a Cold War for resources that have been raging, that the U.S. has kind of stood on the sidelines and is now getting into. We're finally realizing that China has, gathered together all these strategic resources, and we need to catch up. So that's putting upward pressure on commodities, which obviously has a knock-on effect through the inflation pipeline. And then finally, lowering rates will be challenged in an environment where credit quality is clearly starting to deteriorate. And you see that in, the likes of the private equity firm shares that are all tumbling on, the mark to myth of their various portfolios. And then you look at BDC pricing, et cetera. The levered loan issuance is down 40% so far this year. So, if you get a risk-off period, then you may see Treasury yields go down, but it will provide no benefit to the private sector because spreads will widen out and those costs will go higher.
You know what? You laid it out there for us, Stephanie. And I really love that you did. People just ridicule this thing. You explained both sides of it. And I love that you did because I'm with you. I think brilliant folks are in charge, and if anyone can do it, it's going to be them. And the thing is, they have to be able to pull this off. I feel like it's now or never. Thank you very much. Always love having you on.
Agree.